Imagine standing in front of this colossal, I mean, truly ancient masterpiece of writing. It's intricate, it's towering over you, glowing with gold leaf.
Hmm.
And then you realize it was intentionally designed so that almost no one could actually read it easily.
Right, which forces us to completely reevaluate what writing actually is in the first place. I mean, for most of us today, text is purely functional. It's
Okay.
just a vehicle for data.
Yeah,
But
totally.
in the context we are exploring today, text was not a vehicle for data at all. It was the destination itself.
And that right there is the paradox we are tearing apart today. Our sources for this deep dive bring us right into the center of a grand mosque. You look up, past these massive, pristine white marble walls, past the arches, and you see this flowing, almost musical Arabic calligraphy.
Wrapping around the pillars, spiraling right up into the apex of the dome.
Exactly. And today, we are taking those intricate designs, those letters on the wall, and we're going to read them as a literal timeline of human history.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission today is to explore how Arabic calligraphy is really this organic evolution. It's driven by the rise and fall of empires, massive technological hardware upgrades, and just these profound psychological cravings.
Well, the visual language we are talking about here had to carry an unprecedented weight for a civilization. In early Islamic art, there was a very strong historical avoidance of figurative representation in religious spaces.
Right, so no statues or frescoes.
Exactly. You wouldn't find paintings of people or animals acting as the focal point of a sanctuary. So the written word had to carry the entire visual majesty of a civilization. The letters themselves had to materialize the divine into something permanent.
You are looking at a civilization trying to physically capture something infinite,
Yeah.
using just ink and stone. And to understand how that actually happened, we have to figure out how a society transitions from oral traditions to physical records.
Right, the beginning of the timeline.
Yeah. Before you can write quickly, you have to establish permanence. And our sources point us straight to the 7th century, specifically the ancient city of Kufa in Iraq.
Kufa is really the epicenter for our starting point here. This is where we see the solidification of the earliest formal Islamic typeface, which literally took its name from the city, Kufic's script.
Okay, Kufic.
Right. And if you look at an early Kufic inscription, the visual impact is just arresting. It is defined by absolute unyielding geometry.
I am looking at some of the visual examples from the research right now, and honestly, it looks like ancient pixel art. Or maybe brutalist architecture.
That's a great way to describe it.
It's incredibly blocky and heavy. It looked like it was built, constructed with a plumb line and a level rather than written by a human hand.
The word constructed is vital there, actually, because the aesthetic of Kufic was not just some purely stylistic choice made in a vacuum. The visual characteristic of this script is a direct consequence of the medium it was interacting with.
The hardware, basically.
Precisely. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the primary mediums for monumental writing were unforgiving. We are talking about chiseling into limestone or marble, stamping onto rigid metal coins, or weaving raised patterns into brickwork.
So, the medium is literally fighting the artist. You
Yeah.
can't just take an iron chisel and casually carve a sweeping, elegant, perfectly circular curve into a stone wall.
Try it, and the stone shatters. Or, at best, the curve just looks jagged and amateurish. So to achieve perfection in stone or brick, you must work with the grid. You rely on straight vertical lines, rigid horizontal baselines, and sharp 90-degree angles.
So there's a complete absence of rounded, flowing curves.
Exactly. The physical limitations of the hardware, the chisel, and the stone dictated a highly geometric software.
The sources anchor this period with two really incredible artifacts that show how this played out. The first is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, built around 692 AD.
A magnificent structure.
Yeah, and this features the first truly monumental inscription of the Islamic world, towering over the viewer in that strict Kufic geometry. But then, a couple of centuries later, we see something called the Blue Quran from Kairouan in Tunisia.
Ah, yes. The Blue Quran.
And this one really caught my attention because it isn't stone, it's parchment. I mean, it's animal skin, dyed a deep, mesmerizing indigo blue with these blocky Kufic letters rendered entirely in gold.
It's stunning. The Blue Quran is arguably one of the most important manuscripts in history, and it perfectly illustrates the psychological function of the Kufic script. Because when you observe those golden, angular letters marching evenly across the dark blue parchment, the slow, deliberate pacing becomes
It's
obvious.
very spaced out, right?
Very. The space between the letters is vast. Words are frequently broken arbitrarily at the end of a line just to maintain a perfect rectangular block of text.
Which brings me back to that initial paradox I mentioned. Breaking words in half just to make a perfect rectangle makes it an absolute nightmare to read. Why build a writing system that seemingly resents the reader?
Because reading, at least in the modern rapid scanning sense we are used to, just wasn't the primary objective.
Wait, really? Writing that wasn't meant to be read?
Well, in the early centuries of the Islamic Empire, the memorization of the holy text was a massive oral tradition. The community already knew these words by heart. The physical book, especially an impossibly expensive object like the Blue Quran, was not an instruction manual to be studied.
So what was it?
It was a visual placeholder for the holy. It was an icon. You were meant to stand before it, process the gold and the blue, and feel the immense weight of its solemnity.
Wow. So the aesthetic completely overpowers the data transfer. It's basically a meditative object.
Exactly.
And the sources even detail how this script pushed that aesthetic obsession to its absolute limit as time went on. They developed floral Kufic, where the stiff vertical lines sprout these elaborate intertwined leaves and vines.
Yes, the decoration just takes over.
And then there is square Kufic. This is the one that is just mind-bending. The text is arranged on a perfect mathematical grid to create flawless maze-like symmetry. Honestly, it looks like an incredibly dense QR code.
That's a perfect analogy. Square Kufic strips away any remaining pretense of immediate legibility. It is essentially a cryptographic puzzle.
So you're just standing there trying to decode a wall.
Right. It forces the viewer to halt completely, trace the labyrinthine lines with their eyes, and slowly, painstakingly reconstruct the words. It demands absolute, undivided attention, pulling the viewer into a state of active contemplation.
But, okay, here's my question. If this script is so sacred and so perfect for forcing contemplation and capable of creating these incredibly beautiful, mesmerizing puzzles, what breaks the system? Why isn't everything in the Islamic world still written in blocky geometric Kufic?
Well, the system breaks because an empire cannot run on contemplation alone. Kufic contained a fatal structural flaw that became a critical liability as the centuries passed.
Let me guess, it was just too slow.
It consumed an enormous amount of time, yes.
Yeah, planning the grid, applying the gold, carving the stone.
Exactly that. The execution was painstakingly slow. And conversely, interpreting those densely packed, undotted geometric mazes was equally slow for the reader. I mean, when a civilization consists of a localized community, or when it is building singular, monumental testaments to its faith, time is a luxury you can afford.
Sure.
But history accelerated.
Right, the geopolitical reality completely shifted.
Yeah.
So we are moving into the Abbasid dynasty, roughly the 8th to 10th centuries, and the empire just explodes in size.
It becomes a transcontinental superpower. The territories stretch all the way from the Iberian Peninsula to the borders of China.
That is massive.
And with that unprecedented territorial expansion comes a crushing administrative burden. Imagine the logistics of that. You have provincial governors requiring constant communication, massive taxation systems, complex legal decrees.
Oh man, the paperwork.
Exactly. Plus vast translation movements bringing Greek science into Arabic, and an immense military requiring constant logistical coordination.
You cannot run a global bureaucracy if your accountants and your clerks are treating every single tax receipt or supply requisition like it's a sacred stone monument. I mean, the state would just grind to a halt.
The sheer volume of documents required to maintain the empire simply outgrew the slow, deliberate carving of Kufic. The administration needed bandwidth. It needed speed, standardization, and immediate clarity.
So we have a massive logistical crisis, which basically sets the stage for a technological revolution. And the sources point to a specific figure who steps in to solve this. We're in the 10th century now, and we meet Ibn Muqla.
Ibn Muqla is such a defining figure in this narrative. He lived from 886 to 940 AD, and crucially, he was not just some isolated artist working in a studio.
Right, he was actually in the government.
Yes, he was a vizier, a high-ranking government minister. In fact, he served under 3 different Abbasid caliphs, so he was intimately familiar with the administrative bottleneck. He literally watched the imperial bureaucracy choke on its own handwriting.
He sees the problem from the top down. The user experience of the empire's communication is completely broken. So he invents a new script called Naskh. And the research mentions that the name itself is incredibly pragmatic.
Oh, very much so.
Naskh translates roughly to copy or to transcribe, right?
That's correct. But the genius of Ibn Muqla was not simply walking in and telling his clerks to write faster, because faster usually just means sloppier. He engineered an entirely groundbreaking, standardized system of proportions. He brought mathematical precision to cursive writing.
Okay, this is the part I really need to understand, because the sources describe this complex geometric system using dots and circles. How exactly do you mathematically standardize human handwriting in the 10th century? Sounds impossible.
Well, you start by defining a fundamental unit of measurement. For Ibn Muqla, that base unit was the dot created by the calligrapher's reed pen.
The pen itself is the ruler.
Exactly. The traditional pen, the solemn, is cut from a reed at a specific angle. If you press the nib firmly onto the paper and lift it straight up without dragging, it leaves a perfect little diamond shape, a rhombus.
Okay, so one press of the pen equals one rhombus dot.
And that single dot became the pixel of his design system. Everything scaled directly from there. He decreed that the letter alif, which is the first letter of the Arabic alphabet, essentially a straight vertical stroke, must be exactly a certain number of these diamond dots tall.
Ah, I see.
So depending on the specific variation, it might be 5 or 7 dots high.
He literally creates a universal typographic ruler based on the pen tip.
Precisely. And once you have the alif anchored as your vertical standard, you use it to generate the curves.
Wait, how do you use a straight line to make a curve?
He took the length of that specific alif and used it as the diameter for a reference circle. Every single curved letter in the Naskh script, the bowls, the swoops, the loops, had to perfectly conform to the arc of that specific circle.
Wow, that is an unbelievable level of control. He liberated the letters from the rigid straight-line grid of Kufic, but he didn't just let them become chaotic scribbles. He bound the curves to the geometry of the circle.
The result was a script of miraculous proportion and harmony. The letters adopted these flowing, aerodynamic curves that were infinitely scalable and perfectly consistent. And this mathematical standardization meant that a scribe in Baghdad could write a legal document, and a governor in North Africa could read it instantly, without any ambiguity.
It's like standardizing a font across all operating systems.
Exactly.
But Ibn Muqla's geometric system didn't just happen in a vacuum, right? There is a major hardware shift happening simultaneously that makes these flowing circular curves even possible. I mean, the empire's in carving these new Naskh documents into stone.
No, absolutely not. The medium had fundamentally changed. This administrative revolution was entirely dependent on the introduction of paper.
Yes. The sources mention paper arriving from China in the 8th century.
Following the Battle of Talas in 751, the Islamic world acquired the technology for papermaking from Chinese prisoners of war.
Talk about a world-changing event.
Truly. Because before this, they relied on papyrus, which is very brittle and fibrous, or parchment, which is durable but astronomically expensive. I mean, it requires slaughtering entire herds of animals just to make one single book.
Yeah, you definitely can't run a sprawling transcontinental bureaucracy on dead sheep.
Paper changed everything. It could be manufactured from linen rags and hemp. It was relatively cheap, it was abundant, and crucially, its surface was incredibly smooth.
Right, the texture matters.
Hugely. If you try to write Kufic on smooth paper, it feels halting and unnatural. You have to constantly stop, lift the pen, and angle it to get those harsh corners. But Naskh, with its mathematically calculated rounded curves, allowed the reed pen to glide rapidly and continuously across that smooth surface.
It's the perfect marriage of hardware and software. Paper is the hardware upgrade, offering this frictionless surface, and Naskh is the software update designed to maximize speed on that exact surface. It's no wonder the sources say Naskh completely democratized knowledge.
It really did. It pushed Kufic entirely out of daily functional use. Suddenly, books became easier to produce, libraries swelled, and scientific manuscripts could be copied and disseminated with unprecedented speed.
And the legacy of that 10th century vizier is still everywhere today. The research notes that Naskh became the absolute standard for the Quran, completely replacing those giant Kufic manuscripts. And when the printing press eventually arrived in the Middle East, Naskh was the model for the movable type.
It was the clear choice.
And even today, if you open a web browser or read an Arabic newspaper or just look at the text messages on a smartphone, you're looking at the direct descendants of Ibn Muqla's Naskh script. He basically solved the data transfer problem for a millennium.
He brought absolute order and efficiency to the page. But, as history shows us, sheer efficiency rarely satisfies the totality of human experience.
Right. We are complicated.
Very. Naskh solved the problem of the desk and the archive. But human beings are not merely data processors.
So we solved the reading problem, but we basically created a new one. A perfectly proportional, highly efficient, standardized script is fantastic for a legal contract or a tax receipt. But if you walk into a towering sacred space, a neat little bureaucratic font doesn't exactly induce religious awe.
No, it doesn't.
The civilization fixed the administration, but they lost the visual majesty that Kufic used to provide.
They needed to reclaim the monumental. They needed a script that could draw the gaze of the masses back up to the heavens, but with a completely different energy than the heavy, static stones of the past. Which brings us to the 11th century and a script that represents the zenith of dynamic, explosive emotion.
Thuluth.
Thuluth, yes.
The sources describe it as an absolute powerhouse of a script. The name itself translates to 1/3, right? Which suggests it's still playing by Ibn Muqla's mathematical rules to some degree.
The name 1/3 is actually subject to some historical debate.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It likely refers to the specific proportion of straight lines to curved lines within the letters, roughly 1 part straight to 2 parts curved. Alternatively, some scholars think it might refer to the precise, sharp angle at which the nib of the bamboo reed pen was cut to produce these really dramatic, varying strokes.
Interesting.
But regardless of the exact origin of the name, Thuluth took the geometric foundations of Naskh and just magnified them to an awe-inspiring scale.
The sources mention later masters, like Yaqut al-Mustasimi in the 13th century, who pushed Thuluth to its absolute peak. But when I look at the visual descriptions of Thuluth in action, it seems like they took all that beautiful legibility from Naskh and just threw it right out the window.
It can certainly seem that way, yes.
I mean, it's sprawling, the letters overlap, the strokes are absolutely enormous. Are they moving backward? Did we just spend a century fixing readability only to abandon it again?
We have to evaluate the script within its intended environment. Naskh belonged on the page, but Thuluth belonged to the architecture.
Oh, yeah.
The objective of Thuluth was not to transmit new information. When you stand in a grand mosque, the inscriptions on the upper walls or the dome are verses from the Quran. The congregants already knew these verses intimately. They didn't need to read them to know what they said.
So if it's not transferring data, what is it actually doing up there?
It is dictating the emotional rhythm of the space. The visual characteristics of Thuluth are engineered for pure catharsis. The vertical strokes, the alifs, are elongated massively, stretching upward like pillars, and then the curved bowls of the letters swoop down and interlock with the words below them, creating these incredibly complex vertical layers of text.
It looks incredibly physical. You can almost feel the kinetic energy of the calligrapher's arms sweeping across the surface.
That kinetic energy is entirely intentional. Imagine standing beneath a concave dome 50 feet in the air, or looking up at the towering bands of a minaret. Thuluth is what you see. Its massive, undulating waves of interlocking letters literally pull your eye upward.
It guides your physical gaze.
Yes. It scales the massive empty space of the architecture and forces the viewer's gaze toward the heavens, eliciting this overwhelming sense of sublimity.
One of the sources uses this fantastic phrase, calling Thuluth a visual explosion, and it argues that no modern pop art or experimental typography even attempts what Thuluth achieves. I mean, pop art sits in a bright gallery at eye level. Thuluth is woven into the structural fabric of a colossal building, manipulating your physical posture and your emotional state simultaneously.
Modern typography is largely obsessed with clarity, branding, and grabbing immediate attention. Thuluth, on the other hand, was designed to arrest your momentum and force you to contemplate eternity. It is environmental art on a scale that operates almost subconsciously.
You feel it before you read it.
Exactly. You feel the weight and the rhythm of the words before you ever attempt to decipher them.
So we've gone from the slow, silent stones of 7th century Kufic to the hyper-efficient paperwork of 10th century Naskh to this towering emotional explosion of 11th century Thuluth. It feels like the Arabic script has essentially conquered every monumental and administrative need of the empire.
It has. But a living language never stagnates. Once a script masters the universal needs of a civilization, like religion and administration, it inevitably begins to fracture and adapt to local, highly specific cultural moods.
The empire decentralizes. As we move into the 14th century and beyond, distinct regional powers emerge. And they don't just want to use the standard imperial fonts anymore. They want a visual identity that reflects their specific cultural values.
A local flavor, so to speak.
Right. So let's look at Persia, which develops a totally unique script called Nastaliq.
Ah, Nastaliq. If Thuluth is a crashing wave of monumental power, Nastaliq is a suspended exhalation. The defining visual marker of Nastaliq is its complete rejection of the strong horizontal baseline that anchors almost all other Arabic scripts.
The baseline is slanted, right? The words don't march straight across the page.
Correct. They cascade diagonally downward from right to left.
Which creates this profoundly fluid, almost weightless sensation. The letters appear to be hanging in the air, kind of drifting downward, and the curves are elongated and incredibly delicate, while the vertical strokes are actually shortened.
That's a very striking departure.
It looks dreamy, and the sources explain exactly why it looks that way. Nastaliq wasn't designed for tax records or towering mosque walls. It was the designated script for Persian literature, specifically for romantic and mystical court poetry.
In Persian culture, poetry holds an elevated, almost sacred status. The words of masters like Rumi or Hafez were meant to be savored, recited slowly, and contemplated in intimate settings. So Nastaliq was engineered to physically mimic the lyrical, melodic flow of spoken poetry.
It's basically the typographic equivalent of a musical score. I mean, you wouldn't use a harsh, blocky font to write out a delicate love letter or a mystical poem. Nastaliq provides the visual pacing for the romance.
It sets the psychological atmosphere before a single word is even read. But I think it's fascinating to contrast that intimate, romantic atmosphere with what was happening simultaneously over in the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, yes. They developed a script known as Diwani.
Exactly.
And Diwani is just wild. If Nastaliq is for lovers and poets, Diwani is for spies and emperors. The sources say Diwani was the exclusive script of the Ottoman royal court, the Diwan.
Diwani was designed for the ultimate corridors of power, and its visual form reflects a really fascinating duality. It had to project the staggering wealth and absolute authority of the Ottoman Sultan, of course, but it also had to protect the empire's most sensitive secrets.
The visual description of Diwani in the research is so specific. It says the overall shape of the text resembles a boat.
A vessel, yes. The lines of text curve deeply in the middle and swoop sharply upward at the ends, creating a boat-like silhouette. The letters themselves are incredibly ornate, utilizing sweeping, exaggerated curves that fold back over themselves.
But the most crucial detail for me is how densely packed it is. The letters overlap and intertwine in these highly complex, tangled ways. The sources note that this makes Diwani incredibly difficult to decipher if you aren't specifically trained in it.
Which brings us to the core mechanism of Diwani. This wasn't just decorative complexity, it was state security. If the royal court is issuing sensitive military orders, land grants, or diplomatic decrees, unauthorized access is a massive threat to the state.
Right.
So Diwani functioned as a cryptographic script.
It's literally a physical encryption system built directly into the handwriting.
Yeah.
But how exactly does that prevent forgery?
Right.
Because anyone could just try to copy it, right?
Yeah. Well, it relies on spatial intolerance. Because the letters are so intimately intertwined and the negative space between the strokes is so mathematically balanced and intentionally complex, it is virtually impossible to alter the document after it is written.
So if a corrupt official tries to forge a signature or add an extra zero to a land grant, what happens?
They would have to break the visual chain. If you attempt to squeeze an extra letter into that dense interlocking boat shape, you disrupt the entire baseline. You ruin the symmetry of the overlapping curves. It would be instantly obvious to any trained eye that the document had been tampered with.
Oh, wow.
The beauty of the script was its own tamper-evident seal.
That is brilliant. The aesthetic density is the actual security mechanism. Diwani keeps the secrets of the empire locked inside a labyrinth of ink. It just highlights the sheer versatility of what this alphabet became.
It truly evolved to handle every conceivable facet of the human experience over a millennium.
Let's pull back and look at the massive timeline we just covered today. We started in the 7th century with Kufic, those strict, heavy stones that demanded quiet reverence but sacrificed all speed. Then the logistical nightmare of the Abbasid Empire forced a hardware upgrade to paper, and Ibn Muqla engineered Naskh, the lightning-fast, geometrically perfect script that democratized knowledge.
A huge turning point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the soul of the civilization needed more than just paperwork. So the 11th century birthed Thuluth, this explosive, towering text that turned architecture into engines of religious awe. And finally, the script fragmented to serve the specific psychological needs of regional empires, giving us the suspended musical poetry of Persian Nastaliq and the encrypted bureaucratic paranoia of Ottoman Diwani.
It really forces us to recognize that a writing system is never just a neutral tool. It adapts to the physical environment, yes, but it also actively shapes the cognitive environment of the people using it.
We shape our tools, and then our tools shape our minds. The calligraphy wasn't just recording history. It was dictating how millions of people physically and emotionally experience their world.
Which leaves us with a profound question regarding our own era. I mean, the physical realities of stone chisels, the introduction of rag paper, and the acoustics of marble domes fundamentally altered the shape of human language in the past. But today, our primary medium is entirely different.
Right, our medium is glowing pixels on smooth glass.
Yeah.
We live in an era defined by rapid-fire digital communication, character limits, algorithmic feeds, and just absolute instantaneity.
So if every historical era forces language to mutate to fit its specific anxieties and speeds, what unconscious visual evolution is happening right under our fingers?
That is exactly what I want you to chew on today. We've seen how empires forced language to evolve to capture awe, efficiency, and secrecy. What kind of completely new visual language are we creating right now? When the historians of the year 3000 dig through the archives of our servers, what will they conclude about the shape of our fonts, the shorthand of our text messages, and the visual density of our emojis? What will our digital calligraphy say about the soul of our era? Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.